They say the devil doesn't knock. She clicks. High-end heels, patent leather, precision, control. That Tuesday morning, the sound of Patricia Hammond's stilettos striking our porch wasn't just noise, it was an omen. Something primal in me recognized it, the cadence of a predator circling its prey. The moving truck hadn't even cooled, yet there she was, wearing a smile sharpened like a scalpel, and perfume that felt more like a statement than a scent. She slapped an eviction notice on our door like it was her God-given right. Unauthorized curtain color, she said. Turquoise. That was our crime. Turquoise curtains. An aesthetic felony in the dictatorship of Oakwood Heights. She didn't flinch when she said it either, her voice laced with smug righteousness, like she was delivering divine judgment. These threaten the visual harmony of the community, she hissed, eyes scanning our home like a general surveying a battlefield. But I smiled. Because what Patricia didn't know, what none of them knew, was that she had just stepped onto land we owned. And this story, our story, was never about curtains. It was about control, and what happens when the puppet masters forget who built the stage beneath their feet. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a war, and Patricia, she fired the first shot. But I already had the deed, to her house, to her street, to her world. Oakwood Heights looked like the kind of place you'd see in a real estate dream. Tree-lined streets, fresh mulch, white fences so clean you'd think God pressure-washed them himself. People waved with plastic smiles, the kind that tremble at the edges when no one's looking. When Riley and I first moved in, it felt promising. A fresh start after the chaos of the city. Clean air, clean lawns, clean slates. But under the trimmed hedges and vinyl siding, I could feel it. Something brittle, performative. A neighborhood not built for comfort, but for conformity. Everything looked perfect because everyone was afraid not to be. The first week was uneventful, unpacking boxes, meeting neighbors who spoke like brochures, welcome to the community, as their eyes scanned us like inventory. And then came day 8. That's when she arrived. Patricia Hammond, HOA president, gatekeeper, neighborhood pharaoh. She introduced herself like a politician, clipboard in hand, rules in tow, her tone light but rigid. Her smile never quite reached her eyes, and her eyes, they never left the curtains. Our turquoise curtains. She called them unapproved treatments, said they violated the HOA aesthetic guidelines, white, beige, or cream only. As she said it, her jaw clenched like she was chewing glass. We nodded politely. Riley stood behind me, arms folded, heat rising off her like a storm barely held back. We both knew what this was, not about curtains, not really. It was a test. Patricia was seeing if we'd fold, apologize, shrink. We didn't. 3 days later, the first violation notice arrived. $50 per day, retroactive, immediate. And then the campaign began. Patricia didn't just want compliance, she wanted surrender. Every morning at exactly 7 a.m., she marched past our house and took photos like she was documenting a crime scene. Sometimes with board members, sometimes alone, but always lingering, watching, judging. The fines stacked. The letters escalated. Neighbors whispered. Some smiled sympathetically. Others just stared. Then came the neighborhood meeting. An hour-long sermon on preserving property values, with thinly veiled barbs about newcomers who disrespect the community. And still, we didn't budge. Because I had started digging. And in the brittle silence between her threats, I heard something deeper, cracks in her empire. Something was wrong with the land beneath Oakwood Heights. Something she didn't know, but I did. There's a strange thing about land in America. We walk on it, build on it, fence it, fight for it. But most people never ask who really owns it. Patricia didn't. She just assumed. But I didn't come to Oakwood Heights to assume. I came to understand. And that understanding started with a question that stuck in my skull like a nail. Why did our deed look different? At first, it was subtle, a line in the closing paperwork, a reference to a private trust, a strange parcel code that didn't match the HOA maps. So, while Patricia waged her little war over curtain color, I went digging, not just into the HOA documents, but into the land records themselves. I spent nights at the county assessor's office, flipping through microfiche and yellowing plat maps. Dusty records from before Oakwood Heights had a name, before Patricia had a podium, before there was a single beige curtain to enforce. And that's when I found it. In the 1960s, the original developer of the area had fallen on hard times: financial collapse, liquidity crisis, quiet desperation. To cover mounting debts, he began selling off portions of land, not houses, land, unbuilt lots, common areas, even sections beneath what would later become homes. The HOA was established decades later, built on the faulty assumption that they controlled the neighborhood, but they didn't, not all of it. A handful of parcels had slipped through the cracks, sold to private investors and then buried in trust transfers, family inheritances, and tax records no one had bothered to cross-check. One of those investors? Riley's great-uncle. And when he died, Riley became the legal heir to everything he'd acquired. Our house, fully owned, no HOA easement. The greenbelt, ours. The playground, ours. 5 lots beneath standing homes, also ours. One of those homes was Patricia Hammond's. She'd been queen of the HOA for 8 years, strut. Ting across board meetings, dictating paint colors and mailbox heights, completely unaware that she lived on leased land owned by the woman whose curtains she was trying to evict. That's when it all clicked. This wasn't a war about style. It was about power. And Patricia had no idea. She had just picked a fight with her landlord. It was supposed to be our public humiliation. The HOA hearing. Patricia had set the stage like a courtroom drama. Slides, documents, witnesses. The community center was packed. People came for blood. Or maybe just gossip. But their eyes said the same thing. Let's see how this ends. We arrived early. Riley made sure our turquoise curtains were freshly cleaned and hung proudly in the window, like a war banner. Patricia stood at the board table in her favorite gray power suit, the kind that tries to scream authority but whispers desperation when you know what to look for. Her hands moved with purpose as she arranged her files, but there was a tremor, barely noticeable, but it was there. She started with a PowerPoint. Seriously, a PowerPoint. Graphs, charts, and bullet points. Photos of our house from every imaginable angle. A spreadsheet calculating how much our curtains had supposedly devalued the neighborhood. Her voice climbed, full of righteous fury, as she spoke about protecting the community's integrity. She called us rogue elements. She said we were a threat to visual harmony. She said we were unfit to belong. The board nodded along. They always did. And then it was our turn. I walked to the front with a single folder. No slides, no drama, just truth. The room went quiet. Patricia smirked like she'd already won. But that smirk didn't last long. I started pulling documents out, one by one, the original 1962 subdivision plat, the 1968 tax sale certificates, title transfers, lease agreements, and finally, the deed, not just to our house, but to the land beneath 5 others, including Patricia's. Her face cracked. It wasn't shock, it was realization. The kind that hits in the gut, cold and final. The board looked lost, like school children caught cheating by the principal. They scrambled through their own copies of the HOA charter, desperately, hoping for a clause, a loophole, a lifeline. There wasn't one. We didn't just own our home, we owned their mistake. And in that moment, surrounded by whispers and stares, Patricia Hammond finally understood. She wasn't the enforcer. She was the tenant. And she had been barking orders at her landlord for months. Silence. That's what followed the last page of my folder hitting the table. Not anger, not outrage, just a still, suffocating silence. Patricia's hands clutched her clipboard like it was a life raft. Her voice, when it finally came, was brittle. "This is fraud. You forged these." The words trembled, not with conviction, but fear. But truth doesn't shake. Harold Morrison, the HOA's treasurer, was already dialing the county assessor's office. 10 minutes. That's all it took. 10 minutes to confirm that every document was real, every ownership record current, every lease valid. And then the oxygen was gone from the room. The realization spread like a virus. We didn't just win the hearing, we undermined the entire foundation Patricia built her power on. She had harassed her landlord, she had fined her landlord, she had filed eviction proceedings, against someone who owned the land her house was built on. That wasn't just ironic, it was dangerous, legally radioactive. The board whispered frantically, their eyes darting like trapped animals. Someone mentioned lawsuits. Someone else muttered personal liability. Patricia stood in the eye of it all, her authority unraveling faster than she could grab it. Then, Margaret Sullivan, the soft-spoken neighbor from 2 doors down, stood up and delivered the coup de grace. I motioned to remove Patricia Hammond as HOA president, effective immediately, on the grounds of gross negligence, abuse of power, and exposing this association to catastrophic legal risk. No one hesitated. The vote was unanimous. Even Patricia's own inner circle betrayed her. She screamed, ranted, claimed it was a conspiracy, that we were the threat, that Oakwood Heights would fall without her order and vision. But no one listened. They were already listening to the attorney Riley had called during the recess. Our attorney. He handed Patricia 2 envelopes. PES. One was a lease violation notice for unauthorized structural changes to her home. That fancy sunroom she bragged about? Illegal. The second? A bill. $1,600 in back rent. Due in 30 days. Her face flushed with a rage so deep it turned purple. A color, I'd like to note, not on the approved HOA palette. The same neighbors who once praised her now avoided her eyes. The same board that cheered her PowerPoints now looked like they were witnessing a funeral. Because they were. The Queen of Oakwood Heights had fallen, and the kingdom she ruled from fear, it was never hers to begin with. Power is a strange thing. When you don't have it, it feels like gravity. When you do, it feels like a lie everyone agreed to believe. Patricia Hammond believed the lie. She believed control came from a title, from rules written on HOA letterhead. She thought the threat of fines could break people, that appearances mattered more than truth. That fear, quiet, smiling fear, was enough to keep everyone in line. But power doesn't come from rules. It comes from ownership and awareness. And the people who write the rules, they rarely expect someone to read the footnotes. After the hearing, Oakwood Heights changed, slowly, uncomfortably. People avoided Patricia. Her once loyal allies wouldn't make eye contact. Her house, the one she ruled from, now bore the quiet shame of unpaid rent and revoked authority. It sat heavy in the middle of the neighborhood, like a toppled statue. The HOA, once loud and proud, turned inward. Fewer meetings, fewer fines. The clipboard brigade vanished overnight. Even the lawn inspection patrol stopped their weekly rounds. Because now they knew, not all houses stood on the ground they thought they did, and everyone wondered, how much more had they forgotten to check? But for me and Riley, it wasn't about revenge. It was about principle. We never wanted to dominate, only to be left alone. Our turquoise curtains still hang in the window, brighter than ever, unbothered. Some neighbors even started putting up their own colors, a quiet rebellion, a whisper of autonomy in a place built on obedience. The truth is, Patricia wasn't the villain, she was the system that teaches people to fear difference, worship conformity, and weaponize rules to control their neighbors. She just forgot one thing. Systems are only strong until someone reads the fine print. And sometimes, that someone owns your land.